let's get into creating a webcomic, specifically a webcomic serial. If your book is written as a serial, there's a few different ways you can make it into a webcomic. One, you can license your webcomic rights to companies and creators who will make the webcomic for you and sell it, and you'll get royalties. Again, like with any contract, make sure you're reading it over and having a lawyer review it. You can also do it yourself. And there are tons and tons of comics that are indie created, indie published, and they're published on platforms like Webtoon, Tapas. I think there's Webcomic app. There's a bunch of them. But a lot of times, if your work gets really popular on these websites, the website will reach out to you directly and maybe offer you a contract to have your comic exclusive to their platform. But how do you get to that point? Maybe you do your art yourself, and that's great, you should do it. But maybe you are just a writer and you don't wanna do the art yourself. So, what you can do is reach out to a bunch of artists to create a web comic basically for you. So, I would suggest finding, like, 10 to 20 artists that you love their work, they're open for commissions, or they're willing to work with an author, and reach out to them through DM, through email, whichever they prefer, and basically have a proposal of, "Hey, I want to it's in my budget to pay you X amount of money to create this webcomic that's going to be" I don't know how many chapters you have in your serial, but you can start with 1 season. We'll do this comic for 1 season as long as you're okay with continuing it if it's successful. And so you start there and reach out to all these people, offer them payments. Maybe that's in the form of royalties, maybe that's in the form of an advance or monthly payment or per chapter. A lot of them probably are not going to get back to you or they're not going to be interested just because a lot of artists like to work on their own stuff. But some people will, and you guys can negotiate payment, however that is, deal with all that stuff. But once you secure an artist, you are going to want to get to work on writing that webcomic, the dialogue, and all the text that's going to go along with it. And those are going to be a little bit different than if you were going to just release a written serial. So for the webcomic, it's going to be more like a script. And how you're going to want to frame it is you're going to have that drama, all that stuff, as if you were writing a serial. You want it dialogue heavy, maybe some thoughts in there, action as well. And then preferably you leave off on a cliffhanger if you can. Honestly, it depends on how long you want the chapter to be. I know people who have episodes or chapters that are like super long, like 50 panels. And I know some other authors or creators of webcomics who have episodes that are about 10 to 12 panels long. So honestly, it depends on you, your audience, how many times you can update, but just keep that in mind as you're creating this script for your webcomic artists to use. Once you're done with that, you are going to basically give it to him, give him what panels he needs to create. You'll create it, and you're going to release this webcomic as if you were releasing a written serial. So on serial webcomic apps, again, like Webtoon, Tapas, and the webcomic app, you can release it on social media too, and all that fun stuff. And you can utilize the art on social media to grow your community. So, preferably, you're working with an artist who has a following already on social media so he can share along and say, hey, you should check out this webcomic that I'm working on. And what's really cool about having a webcomic created is you now have all this extra artwork for your story that you can utilize elsewhere. So you can monetize this webcomic serial through merch. So you have a really popular comic panel that people loved. You could put it on, I don't know, a mug, you can put it on a t-shirt, anywhere you want, any type of merchandise that you want, and you can sell that on social media. You can sell that on your cereal itself, like in the comments. Most places, most reading apps also have the ability for you to direct people to a subscription. So they can read for early access, or maybe you want to sell your merch there. That's something that you can do, and you can link directly to that for the most part in webcomic serial reading apps. But you also, I would suggest, we talked a little bit about author notes, and I would suggest adding author notes into your comics as well. So this could come in the form of comments, and sometimes there is a place to leave an author's note depending on the serial app, but basically you're going to utilize everything you know about author notes. So you're basically saying, "Hey, I hope you enjoyed this chapter. Here's a question about it. What do you think is going to happen next? Who's your favorite character so far? What panel do you love the most?" And then you can utilize that panel to create merch for them. You can do polls, whatever it is. So that is something I would recommend you add. Um, you're also can add front and back matter to all of the panels. Matter would look like, or for all the chapters, sorry. Front matter for a chapter or episode would look like the title of your story and by your author name and illustrated by your webcomic artist name. Back matter, it might be like, "Thank you for reading this webcomic. Here's how you can support me." And then lead to your subscription or wherever that might be. You can also add panels that are upcoming, or you can do previously on if it's been a while since you last updated. All these little things you can add to your webcomic. Just a couple of notes though about webcomics and webcomic reading apps. So most of these apps do not have microtransactions in place for the everyday indie creator. Usually, microtransactions are only available through their exclusive programs. So if they're like, "Hey, your story's doing really awesome. We want to have you featured as one of our original comics, and we will put a wait to unlock model in place so people can purchase each chapter or episode." That's definitely something you can do. Again, we talked about the specific style of writing webcomics. You still want it serialized, but it's going to be written in like a script format. And then front and back matter. Make sure you add that place to support because chances are if they're reading your comic and it's serialized, they may want to throw you some bucks, some change, whatever that might be. And some may even want to support you through early access. So definitely something to be aware of and maybe something to think about because Webtoon had said that they're growing 20% year over year. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how the market shifts for serials and for just fiction in general in the upcoming years with the emergence of both more fiction podcasts and webcomics. So, keep an eye out. That is the end of this section, but I will see you in the next one.